Well, hello everyone. I'm Sean McVeigh, National Training Coordinator for the Soil Science Division, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Creating Statewide Department of Homeland Security Interp Maps using gSSURGO. Our speaker today is Steve Peasley, GIS Specialist at the National Soil Survey Center. Before I get started with Steve, I'd like to go over a few things in our webinar layout in Adobe Connect. You'll notice we've got several windows here of information that you can use to ask a question in the Q&A pod. And if you're having trouble with the audio, there's some instructions for the audio setup. And I've also included some tips for taking a successful webinar. I'd encourage you to look those over if you haven't already. Today's meeting is being recorded, and we'll make that recording available on our National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel in a few days. So I'd encourage people that to let your colleagues know that have missed this opportunity. They can take advantage of that archive recording on YouTube. So Steve, I want to thank you for being available today. I know the weather is bad and many of us are teleworking here in Lincoln. So Steve's got set up at home where he can telework and make this presentation. So Steve, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Yeah, I'm sitting here looking at the snow out the window with my trusty sidekick, Sophie the cat. So it's kind of nice to be able to do this from home. I like the technology. Recently, I'd say over the past couple of months, I've fielded some questions from folks out in the States asking about mapping related to avian flu. And so I thought now would be a good time to present something. Latest version of gSSURGO was just released a couple of weeks ago. And so hopefully most of you have downloaded that data. And there are two USDA websites relevant to this discussion. The first one is Geospatial Data Gateway, and the second website is gSSURGO homepage. And here's what the Gateway homepage looks like. I'm sure most of you have used it, but perhaps you haven't downloaded gSSURGO from that website. And to do that, fairly easy. Instead of clicking on the green Get Data button, you click on that little link that I've highlighted with the red oval in the lower right corner. It's called Order by State. And then you just scroll down through the alphabetical list once you've picked your state, and you'll see down in the soil section the final listing for data layers is Gridded Soil Survey Geographic, or gSSURGO. And so that's what you would download. The download sizes vary anywhere from a few megabytes for the smaller states to 2 or 3 gigabytes for the larger ones. So it's a fairly good sized data set, but most of us have the capability of working with that much data these days. And then the second website is the gSSURGO homepage, and this is what that looks like. So we've got a lot of information related to gSSURGO on this webpage, including a user guide for gSSURGO, which is at the top link right here. And then we also have links to a set of our tools, our toolbox, which has a couple of different pieces of documentation. There's a development user guide, which shows you how to use the tools, not necessarily just for mapping, but for developing your own gSSURGO if you have requirements for developing custom databases for like a watershed or for a region, then those soil data development tools have that capability. You don't necessarily have to download the state tile from Geospatial Data Gateway. And then there's also this next document, this Quick Start Guide. That's some of the information that we're actually going to go over today, and that's using the mapping section of the toolbox to create maps with gSSURGO. And I do mention up here at the top that these web pages sometimes change, so I hate to stick URLs in all these documents, plus they're pretty cryptic. So I tell people the easiest way to find this web page is just go to Google and search for gSSURGO and NRCS, and be one of the first links that pops up. So the mapping tool set is part of the Soil Data Development Toolbox. And you can see on the right-hand side of the page that we have the toolbox itself, and then underneath the toolbox are a couple of other levels. These are the tool sets. So there's one for downloading SURGO in an automated fashion, and then one for creating gSSURGO databases and the raster layer. And then thirdly is the gSSURGO mapping tool set, which is what we're going to focus on today in this webinar. And specifically, I'll go ahead and point it out now. We're going to talk about this one single tool, the map soil properties and interpretations. And I should mention that I do update this tool fairly often. I keep one copy on the NRCS GIS SharePoint that I update almost weekly, I would say, because I keep either fixing bugs or adding new functionality. You can also download the tools off the gSSURGO webpage. That one I have to have somebody else upload the file to the FTP site, so it maybe doesn't get updated quite as often. And there probably will be a new version up either later today or tomorrow.
Steve, there's a question online maybe you can answer on the fly here.
Sure.
Can the toolbox be shared with users outside of the NRCS?
Yes, because for one thing, the gSSURGO webpage is available to the public, so anybody can download those tools. And I actually bundle documentation within the zip file. All the files are zipped together, so if a user just downloads the zip file, puts it in a folder, and unzips everything within that folder, then they can easily, that's all the installation that's really required for these. So that's not a problem. I do have quite a few users out in the public that are using these. And there is another, I'll go ahead and mention that there is another set of tools for mapping with gSSURGO developed by Chad Ferguson and Jason Nemechek. And I'm not going to demonstrate those today, but I do have a link on the final page in this PowerPoint that tells you where you can download those tools. Functionality is fairly similar. There are a few differences. Okay, starting off in that Arcmap, which is the application that you need to run the tool within, the Map Soil Properties Interpretations tool. I have a set of layers based on West Virginia, so hopefully I don't offend anybody. I saw Wendy was on. Hopefully I don't offend anybody today from West Virginia. I'll try not to. The first layer is the soil polygon layer for West Virginia. And you can see it's kind of grayed out. The checkbox is grayed out. And that means I've set a display dependency. So I try not to display all of the polygons across the entire state at this scale because it would take too long to draw. But I do have the map unit raster layer is being displayed. And that's what you're seeing in the black and gray colors. Okay, another question they're asking about versions of Arcmap. These tools work with Arcgis Desktop versions 10.1 through 10.3. They will not work with ArcGIS Pro, and they will not work with ArcGIS 10.0 or before. Good question. Thank you. So these are the layers, and I've also got a couple of reference layers. I've got state line and labels that turn on also depending on the scale, and then I have the shaded relief background. And so that's all you really need for mapping with these tools. But it does require gSURGO. It will not work with the old shapefile and Access database. Okay, this tool works in a similar manner to Soil Data Viewer. So if you can create a map in Soil Data Viewer, you can do basically the same map using gSURGO. Whereas Soil Data Viewer is limited for the most part in size because there is a limit to shapefile size. Some states can create a statewide shapefile, some cannot. If they have too many polygons, the file size exceeds the 2 gigabyte limit. But with gSURGO, there is no limit. So we can actually use the same tool to map a single county or the entire country. So it's pretty scaleless. Okay, mostly what we're going to talk about today will be the mapping with the disaster recovery planning interpretation, also known as DHS. So now what you're looking at is the user interface for the ARC tool. And unfortunately, ARC tools aren't quite as friendly as writing an application with .NET or even with VBA. The menus are very linear. You just really don't have that much control. But for the most part, this tool has all of the same parameters as Soil Data Viewer does. For the mapping side, it does not have any reporting capability, though. Talks a little bit about each of the different parameters. We're going to go through each of those real quickly. And I also want to point out, if I can grab, we'll point out that on the right-hand side, I have the tool help displayed. And I always keep that open so that when I click on any one of these parameters, if I have questions about what type of information I need to fill out, then just check the help first. That's the easiest way to do it. I try to keep that fairly detailed and up to date. Okay, so the first parameter is the map unit layer, and this layer can be either the map unit polygon layer or the map unit raster layer, which in this case for West Virginia I have a 10-meter raster. As you can kind of see that by the naming convention. And if you only have one of these layers in your Arcmap table of contents, it'll automatically populate that in the first parameter. The main differences between those two layers is that if you're mapping statewide, the raster layer will display much more rapidly. In the file geodatabase, the polygon layer, it displays pretty good compared to what we used to have with the old computers and PCArc info and those things that take 20 minutes to draw even a county. But the file geodatabase is pretty fast, regardless of which formats you use. And the second parameter is the SDB folder, and that uses the same naming convention for that parameter as Soil Data Viewer does. And so when you click on the down arrow for this SDB folder, you'll see all the traditional Soil Data Viewer choice list, building site development, construction materials, and then the third one there that we're going to do today is the disaster recovery planning. So once we pick disaster recovery planning, then you'll notice that the third parameter, that choice list, is then populated. And you click the down arrow, and you can see all of both the national interpretations and in this case, with this West Virginia gSSURGO database, there's also a poultry disposal by composting interpretation that was developed by Jared. And if you only want to see the national interpretations, there's actually a checkbox at the bottom. And most of the time, it's not a problem displaying the local interpretations, unless you're working with a national database, in which case sometimes those choice lists get pretty long, so that's why I included that option. And so once I've selected set the third parameter for the SDV attribute, you notice that some of the other parameters down below are no longer grayed out. So as you check different options, other options either turn on or off. For instance, top depth is grayed out and bottom depth is grayed out. And tie-break rule and some of those others. So it tries to guide you. The default values for like aggregation method are changed according to your selection for the SDV attribute. And okay, this is another option, the map fuzzy values, interp fuzzy values. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. That's another option you can click before you choose to run. And I would say that for most of these, once you pick the top three choices or three parameters, the rest of it, if you want to, you can leave set to default. If there are other parameters that require an entry or a change, you'll get a warning on those or an error message. And so if I went ahead and clicked run on that, or clicked OK and executed that ARC tool, this is what you would see in the console window output. And I try to have the tool write useful messages. And so I would recommend that you make sure that this little checkbox on the upper left corner where it says close this dialog when completed successfully, uncheck that so that you can see the results. Because sometimes there's good information. For instance, the layer file, you may want to copy and paste that and save that information. Or if there are any output tables, it'll tell you where those are located. So it took, I think, well, let me go back here. It took 36 seconds to run the entire state. So if you're doing it the old way and you're generating these for each county in the state using Soil Data Viewer, I don't think you'll get it done in 36 seconds. So this can be a big time saver, which I'm all for saving time. Everybody's got too much to do to take forever to accomplish some of these tasks. Okay, this is what I got. This is a result in Arcmap for the poultry disposal. And I used the dominant condition, and I used the raster layer to create the map. And so you can see the symbology. I had to manually set that up when it added the layer. Thanks, Kevin. When you added the layer, the tool does not automatically assign symbology. It'll go ahead and do the join to the rating table, but it will not automatically set the symbology for you. So you just do it the regular way. Just double-click on the layer and go to the Properties and Symbologies tab and set it to the appropriate field and tell it to add all values, and then set the colors for each of those ratings. Okay, this is the same map, only it shows a different aggregation method, and I will show you these maps here in the next couple of slides a little bit closer a little bit closer view so you can tell the difference. At this scale on your screen, you may have trouble seeing the difference. But the least limiting option for an interpretation, if you end up, sometimes that's a good option to use if you end up with a map all red, which means that everything is severely limited. Well, that's not really all that helpful because you know you're gonna bury those animals somewhere. So sometimes using this least limiting aggregation method may point you to a possible location. Okay, here's the larger, smaller scale maps that I was talking about. And this is the one that I ran for dominant condition. And you can see most of the map appears to be red, which is severely limited, and then some yellow, which is moderately limited. If I flip over to the least limiting, you can see I gained a few more areas that are moderately limited. And sometimes that may be enough to help you out. And I'll show you some other options here in just a minute for perhaps helping winnow out some other locations. This is the other option I was talking about. At the very beginning, before you execute the tool, there was an option to create a map based on the fuzzy values from the interpretation. So those would be values from 0 to 1 rather than those rating classes. And so for this interpretation, we've got the slightly limited would be the zeros, and then the 1.0 would be severely limited. So this gives you some other options for, in fact, if you wanted to, you could add more classes, break it up to 6 or even 10 classes to get a little more detail. Okay, this is a slight variation on the traditional map. And this one was based, I ran that same interpretation on the polygon layer, and then I selected just those polygons that had a slightly limited rating and exported those out to new layer. Since the component percent is part of the rating table, I was able to then color the map based on the component percent. So those green areas are the map units that have a large component percent that is slightly limited, and the red are probably just minor components, so maybe those wouldn't be quite as suitable unless they're a very large map unit polygon. But this kind of gets away from the red map and shows you just the areas maybe that you might want to focus on. And in this case, I think, after I looked at some of these a little more closely, a lot of the places that are suitable for burying these carcasses is probably the same place where people want to live. So a lot of it has housing built on those locations. So in that case, you may want to bump it up and start looking at those areas that are moderately limited. This is another tool. I don't want to go into this in any great detail, but just to make you aware that it's there. There is another tool in that tool set that allows you to break out all of the rating reasons and show where those are out on the map. And this would probably be more of interest to state soil scientists, SDQS. And this is what that looks like. The tool creates a whole series of map layers based on each of the rating reasons. In this case, this is bedrock less than 24 inches. Okay, just got a few more slides here. One of the things that this tool does that is really nice is that it adds full metadata to both the layer and the table of contents. If you right-click on the layer and go to the General tab, there's a description window. So all of the narrative information for this interpretation is copied to that window. along with, you'll notice here at the bottom, all of the settings that you used in the tool in that menu, the aggregation method, component percent off, the output database, the map layer, the rating table. And these rating tables are saved into the gSURGO database, so they're not temporary like the Sol Data Viewer is, they're permanent. The layer file, the path to that is included and will be stored in the same location as the gSURGO database. So if you want to add that layer back in with the symbology, instead of going to the geodatabase and adding the feature class or the raster, you would add the layer file to Arcmap, just like any other data set. And then finally, it gives you the name of the person that ran the tool and the name of the script. And finally, the layer file also has full metadata, and the table that's saved to the geodatabase also has full metadata automatically added. So it includes all that narrative information and then all the settings you used to create the table and the date you created it. Okay, and then finally, last couple of slides here. There's more information on the metadata. And then there was a third tool I didn't show you, but it actually lists all of the interpretations and Sol properties that either Sol Data Viewer or the tool can generate. So if you don't know what's in the database, just run the tool, and it'll give you a list, and you can copy and paste it into a Word document and print it out to keep it handy. If you're like me and you forget where some of those are stored, which folder they're in, that's a good reference. And then to wrap it up, this PowerPoint and this presentation, I think Sean will talk about a little bit. Those will be available online, so you don't need to worry about writing all this information down. But it gives you the URL for the gSURGO webpage, and then second paragraph is the URL on the Wisconsin website. Of course, I don't know that one's public. That's probably just for NRCS access. But that's where their tool is located. gSURGO data can be downloaded from the gateway, and my contact information is there. I'm at the National Sol Survey Center on the interpretation staff. And the final message is, if you have problems with any of the tools, copy and paste the error message. I prefer the text rather than a screenshot, and then just email it to me, and I'll jump right on it for you. Okay, Sean, I think that's it, unless we have questions.
All right, well, we'll give people a moment to compose their question and submit that in the Q&A pod. Steve, I just think that was a great way to show how gSURGO can be leveraged by states to create more of a customized DHS map in their state. And as you pointed out in the example from West Virginia, as with any map, the site has to be available for that particular use to be a suitable site. So good job with that. One of the questions that's come in is, will these tools provide pretty much the same result as the Sol Data Viewer when using conventional SURGO?
They should be the same. That is my intent. Some of the methods that are in Sol Data Viewer are not well documented, so in some cases I tried to reverse engineer those. If you find an issue with that, please let me know. I try to pass these tools out to some other folks that would be able to tell me that, but like everybody else, they get busy and it's hard to get feedback sometimes.
And a follow-up to that, and on Web Sol Survey?
Yes, theoretically those are the same. I've seen a few minor differences because one is based on Microsoft Access and another is based on SQL Server. But for the most part, except for like small round-off differences, they should all be the same. We have seen an issue, I'll mention this for any state soil scientists or database folks that are on. We've seen some issues where the map legend created in the rule manager maybe has some differences, particularly for the text data, which interpretations would be one for the rating classes or text. There might be a difference in the map legend is maybe uppercase or mixed case, and then in the database, it's maybe lowercase. And Web Soil Survey and SQL Server don't care about case. They're not case sensitive, but Soil Data Viewer and Arcmap are case sensitive. So I have seen some places where there's a blank area in the map that actually has data, but since Arcmap didn't recognize that those two values were the same because of the case difference, it didn't fill the polygon.
We've got another question. How did you access the metadata and description of layer properties?
All of this information, that's a good question, all this information came out of the gSSURGO database. There are 3 tables that begin with SDV. There's an SDV folder, SDV attribute, SDV folder attribute. And the SDV attribute table actually contains information about the way the map legend should be created and the description or narrative information. And that's the way Soil Data Viewer does it too. If you click on that description tab in Soil Data Viewer, you'll see that narrative information, and it comes directly out of the database.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. We'll give a moment here for people to have any lingering questions they want to ask.
Okay. Well, they can always email me if they come up with questions later on, too.
And several people commenting that it's a great tool, and thanks.
Thank you.
Steve, I want to thank you for your time and effort today to make this presentation and get the word out about gSSURGO and how it can be used by states. We had over 150 people join today's webinar, so a good turnout with that. The webinar has been recorded, and we'll put that out on our center's YouTube channel in the next few business days. So tell your colleagues that they can catch it there. Or if you thought you had difficulty with the audio, hopefully that's cleaned up in the audio recording. Just do a simple search on YouTube for gSSURGO, and I'm sure you'll be able to find that recorded presentation. And with that, that'll conclude our webinar. Thanks, everyone.